The German Stahlhelm, perhaps one of the most recognizable and influential military helmet designs in modern history. Originating during the First World War, they would be used, refined, redesigned, and generally evolved through the time of the Weimar Republic, the Third Reich, and even to limited extents in the Federal Republic after World War II. On top of this, they would also be exported and copied by many nations that were allies of, associated with, or in the proximity of Germany. However, though all these variants, versions, and foreign copies seem to fit a similar mold, one that stands out quite a bit is that of the Vickers Model 1927. That not only has the distinction of being Ireland's first officially issued helmet, but is also perhaps one of the most controversial in recent history, and not because of the reasons you may think. Surprise! Another video with me in front of the camera. The reason for the appearance is pretty simple. Though this topic is extensive, it's a bit lacking in visuals, at least when it comes to historical images and footage. So hopefully this format is as engaging, plus it mixes things up a little. That being all said, let's get to it. It's 1924 and Ireland is just coming out of a nearly year-long civil war brought on by the 1921 Articles of Agreement for a treaty between Great Britain and Ireland, also known as the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which granted Ireland a level of independence by making it a Dominion state within the British Empire, along with giving the option for Northern Ireland to follow suit or remain a part of Great Britain. After a long war of independence, tensions were still a bit high and many felt this treaty wasn't right, so sides were taken, those who supported it and those who didn't. With just over 10 months of fighting, hostilities came to an end with pro-treaty forces claiming victory, which led to the Irish Free State finally being able to continue to establish itself, with one of the first things done being the creation of a new armed force. This came in the form of the Defence Forces, which was essentially an evolution of the Irish Volunteers that had been created 11 years prior. With its official creation set on the 1st of October 1924, the fledgling force found itself needing to establish itself in many ways, from organization, training, and sourcing not only weapons and gear, but also uniforms. These all presented different challenges and issues that needed to be overcome, with some being somewhat easier, such as the establishment of military colleges and service schools that took inspiration from the United States, but also more trickier, such as equipping troops with proper weaponry and uniforms. When it came to this, the issue was twofold, as the industrial capabilities of the time were somewhat limited, as certain metals and other resources were not very common, meaning for many things, Ireland had to look abroad for either raw material or entirely completed items, such as their service rifle, which remained the British SLME Mark I bolt-action rifle, for example. Though rifles were one thing, British equipment and uniforms were another, and though they were considered and in some cases either influenced or made by British companies, there was a general sentiment that leading too far towards it could cause problems among the disenfranchised, and so alternatives began to be looked at. This was especially the case when it came to helmets, and so assorted foreign designs, including the Brodie, were requested, evaluated, and used on a limited basis. Around this time, the three most widely seen were the Brodie, the Stahlhelm, and the Adrian, which was one of the first to be tested. Being first issued to French forces in July of 1915, these were quickly exported to a number of countries such as Russia, Greece, Serbia, and Belgium, to name a few, proving they were popular, at least as far as numbers go. However, they were deemed unfit and the search continued. Eventually, the candidates were whittled down to the British Helmet Steel Mark I, aka the Brodie helmet, and the German Stahlhelm Model 1960. The Brodies were easy to get, however the German helmets weren't. But based on supposed information available, such as shrapnel protection and user favorability and comfort, the M1916 Stahlhelms were deemed to be the best of the options, and so in 1926, Irish representatives contacted the German consulate asking about obtaining a sample and even placing an order of them to begin equipping forces. The response they received was that due to Article 170 of the Treaty of Versailles, which stated, "Importation into Germany of arms, munitions, and war material of every kind shall be strictly prohibited." The same applies to the manufacturer for and export to foreign countries of arms, munitions, and war material of every kind. Essentially what that meant was they were prohibited from exporting any kind of material related to warfare, which included helmets. The solution? Take the design and find a means of developing the helmet outside of Germany. A number of companies expressed interest, most of whom were British Steel ones, primarily in Sheffield, but upon receiving the specifications and requirements, they said they could not replicate certain elements, as was the case with Hadfield Limited, which stated how they could not achieve the required depth, or in other words, Germany's capabilities, and the maximum they could manufacture was the United States' M1917 helmet, an offshoot of the Brodie, which had changed a few things while also slightly improving their ballistic protection. But before moving a bit further in, let's quickly take a look at an M1916 to get an idea of what they were trying to achieve. Now, this version here is slightly wonky as it has its internals and rivets replaced, but the shell remains the focus. Marked BF64, this denotes it as a FC Bellinger Fulda-made size 64 version. They were made in 6 sizes, 60, 62, 64, 66, 68, and 70. The core components of it were obviously the dome portion, the flared skirt area to protect the sides and back of the wearer's head, and the curved visor, all surrounded by a rolled edge. Additionally, there were 2 permanently attached rivets for the chin strap, with an inside portion seeing a circular with a single point, and 3 split pins, 2 on the front and 1 on the back, used to connect the leather liner. These could easily be undone and pulled out for easy repairs or replacement if needed. Finally were 2 large lugs that served the purpose of allowing for a bit of ventilation into the helmet, as well as for the attaching of a reinforced Sternpanzer or forward plate for increased protection. Now, the big thing here though was the actual metal it was made out of, as the steel was chromium nickel that was also quenched and tempered and stripped down of internals, comes in at about 2 pounds and 6.4 ounces, or just under 1.09 kilograms. This composition proved to be one of the strongest of the time, at least when it came to helmets, and coupled with the overall design was considered by most as the most effective and protective. We'll circle back to the metal in a moment, as it factors into the story quite significantly. As for the chin strap, it was leather, featured 2 points for adjustment, and was attached by lining up the points and turning them to locking them into place. While the liner was mostly leather as well, featured a leather band connected via the 3 pins, and though there was some variation in style, saw 3 leather sections, each of which included 2 dual tongues and small padded pillows underneath, all of which were tied together via string that could be loosened or tightened to adjust the sizing some. Okay, now back to the Vickers. One company said they could manufacture the helmet, Vickers and Company Limited. Known for their production of armaments and warships, among many other items, it's been said Vickers had come into possession of machinery and material which had been confiscated after the war that was able to produce these helmets. Accounts vary, with some saying entire machines, presses, dies, and even parts such as the vent lugs, and so an order was placed. Not wanting to leave the production in the hands of just Vickers, an official from the Irish Defence Force, Commandant Dan Stapleton, was sent to evaluate every 10th helmet stamping, that being an unfinished helmet, via ballistic tests. Beginning in early 1927, these helmets slowly began to arrive in Ireland in batches, with the total number often cited at 10,021, enough to equip the force with a few to spare by 1931 or so. Dubbed the M27 due to them first starting production in 1927, as well as the Vickers helmet after the company's name, the headgear was quickly put into service in time for maneuvers the following year. So now let's take a look at one such example. As with the 1916, you can see the shape overall appears pretty much the same, but looking closer, you'll begin to notice a few differences. To clarify though, this example has certainly seen better days, as it's missing the internals, as well as the 2 front brackets that were used to attach the metal emblem of the Defense Forces, which were often intended to be worn by only officers during field duties and maneuvers, and all others for special and ceremonial purposes. Additionally, it kept the same 2 permanent rivet design for the shell-attached chin strap, as well as 3 copper ones for the liner. This particular one seemed to have had them replaced at some point, so here's a quick image of what originals looked like. It's important to note these were not the same style as the German ones, and were much more permanent in their design, meaning they were a lot less user-friendly. They also shared the same vent lugs, but were really only used for ventilation, as no additional armored plates were ever made for these. More closely though, the angle of the neck guard would become more curved rather than hard angled, while also flaring out a bit further. The curve between the neck guard and the visor would also be longer and less drastic, and the rolled edge would remain, though the quality of them varied, being a bit more rough and uneven. On the back of the neck guard inside the shell, you can find a series of stampings that begin with VLTD, which was short for Vickers and Company Limited, followed by an H for helmet, and a series of numbers, with this one being 7,072, making it the 7,072nd one produced. On most, you'll also see below that an H40 or 407 followed by /27, which were added in 1940 when these were reissued for civil defense purposes. The H40 is said to be connected to the date of reissue, with the 27 being connected to their designation of M27. As far as sizing, it's a bit tricky, as some claim there were only 2, small, which was denoted by a minus sign, or large with a plus, both of which were said to be above those stamps. However, quite a few out there don't feature either, leading some to speculate they were 3, with neither symbol signifying medium, but it could have simply been a case of poor stamping or quality control. Contemporary sources simply state the metal composition as a mild steel, but its weight is a little lighter at 2 pounds and 2 ounces, or about 0.964 of a kilogram. When it came to color, originally they were painted a matte army green with just a pinch of black, said to have been 1%, giving it a darker color overall. Over time, the green had a tendency to darken a bit, moving closer to black. Many were then repainted white post-1940 for certain civil defense and emergency purposes such as air raid wardens and fire services. This one looks to have had its exterior repainted closer to the original green, but inside you can see bits of white from its civil defense years and even some close to black on top of that, which may have been either someone repainting it for personal use or something else. It's hard to say. But as for the internals, which were all made in Ireland, the chin strap had one subtle difference, seeing only one adjuster rather than two, while the liner mostly stayed the same shape as the German M16, which were made in 3 sizes, all by the same Dublin-based company T. Smith & Son. Now you may have noticed the dent on the top as well as the slightly warped shape of it too, which is a pretty significant thing as they both are signs of the problems these helmets faced. As these helmets made their way into the hands of troops, higher-ups began receiving critical feedback and complaints by some stating the poor quality of them as they could dent, bend, warp, and even crack very easily. In fact, with a bit of pressure, many could, if they wanted to, quite literally crush these helmets with just a bit of effort. Realizing something wasn't right and that the ballistic tests may not have been enough, shrapnel testing was conducted on 5 unissued helmets, with all but one seeing the pieces go right through and even out the other side of them in some cases. This essentially began to show that Vickers' claims of being able to replicate the German production methods were not entirely correct. In fact, during the production period, Vickers even stated in a 1927 letter to the Irish Department of Defense, "In these circumstances, we hesitate to ask for a visit for inspection of the 250 helmets only, especially as we expect any day to overcome the difficulties regarding future supplies." This, in the years, decades, and technically now centuries, as we're pretty much passing the 100-year mark soon, has led many to speculate and theorize a few things, with one of the main ones being Vickers essentially conned the Irish government. Some believe it was a way for the British to toy with the Irish to some extent for, well, the social and political reasons of the time, but also due to them selecting a design worn by a few countries the UK fought against during World War I. Others point to a company simply telling them what they wanted to hear and assuring them quality helmets by providing better quality samples to test, only to either skimp out or fail standards after the fact. It's also important to note that the testing conducted by Stapleton were done on unfinished stampings, though it's not quite known which phase these were, considering the M16 Stahlhelm went through 12 stages of stampings between flat sheets and completed shells, so the inspection process may not have been the most optimal. Now, accounts at this point get a little strange, as some claim Vickers was confident in their production due to them being in possession of actual German components, tools, and/or material. However, if you look at the slight differences in the shell designs between the two, that may have not been the case. Additionally, going back to the limitations spoken about by the other interested companies earlier, it may have come down to using different metals made of obviously different compositions. The UK, or really Sheffield, had quite a number of metal and steel companies, many of which specialized in Hadfield steel, or more commonly, manganese steel, which had been utilized in the production of Brodie helmets. As said earlier, the M27's metal composition is said to be simply mild steel, so it's hard to say for certain what the case was, but considering Vickers had also received contracts to produce the Brodie for the British, it's entirely possible they tried to take British steel and the simpler cold press process and apply it to German specifications and production methods, which were much more involved, all on a fledgling Irish budget. An additional clue that could also lend credence to Vickers not being fully aware of the German method was the use of the lugs. Vickers was said to have German-produced lugs. With the M16s, the lugs also had something of a less obvious feature, being a size indicator, as smaller sizes had a larger base, while bigger had none at all. This example here shows 2 different size lugs, possibly suggesting the original purposes of them were either unknown or ignored when producing them. But anyway, come 1930, with all these issues arising, it was decided to not order additional helmets. However, discussions, problems, and improvement attempts continued. On the problem side, apart from the brittle shell, the liners would often fail, likely due to the oxidation and corrosion of the copper rivets, resulting in the helmet often sliding and sitting awkward on wearers' heads. Coupled with the semi-permanent rivets, addressing this was a bit more tedious, and as a way to try and remedy this, some German-produced ones were bought. Go figure. Additionally, the chin straps weren't that favorable as well, due to their positioning and susceptibility to them swiveling and wearing down the connection points, leading to many becoming broken and undone. Germany had similar issues to both of these problems, but addressed them with their updated M18 model that reinforced the liner with a metal band while also redesigning the chin strap and connecting it to it. As far as improvements and discussions, they essentially revolved around whether to attempt to try and fix the helmet some way or find a new design entirely. The biggest of these endeavors endeavors came towards the end of the 1930s, where a machine that could shoot shrapnel bits was looked into, but by 1939 it was ultimately decided to ditch the helmets, leading to the Mark II Brody being adopted as they were considered the next best option after the Stahlhelms. Not to mention the now direct connection to Germany, which was now again at war with much of Europe. Funnily enough, shortly after the outbreak of World War II, 1940 to be exact, a Major Ken Young within the British Army thought the Vickers may be more effective than the Brody, and as such requested the Irish government for a helmet along with any information about them. They obliged and sent him one along with the simple message that they proved not to be. The helmets were then painted bright white and began to be issued to civil defense and emergency units that same year, and even though Ireland maintained a neutral stance during the war, threats remained. In the decades after, these helmets fell into disuse, with the biggest story being the destruction of thousands of them, estimates range between 3,000 and 5,000, in the 1970s, as they've been alleged to have been used as fill of some sort by way of them being flattened and or buried in construction at Curragh Camp, which was and remains the primary training center for the Defense Forces. On top of this, all sorts of stories have circulated over the years saying how handfuls, dozens, or even hundreds have been found in stashes across the country, be they related to civil defense or the Defense Forces, with even ones of people finding them buried or out in a field and so on, leading to the helmets gaining something of an air of intrigue and mystery bordering almost on the mythical in some way. Today they appear from time to time in collections, posts online related to restorations, at shows, and even for sale on websites or at auctions. Though they are a bit cheaper in Ireland, abroad they can often fetch quite a bit of money even in less than stellar condition. This one here is not the best of examples, though is a good case study of what many of these helmets went through and ended up as, and is definitely one of the more intriguing pieces in the collection. For a while, these helmets were downplayed some by Ireland, likely due to their connections, but more than likely because of their quality and, well, general failure, being out to establish itself as a new and competent nation developing something like this with good intentions, only to get a less than proper finished product isn't the best image to project. However, the helmets show that a genuine effort to supply and afford the best was done, and though it fell short, at least it was attempted, and as a result has led these helmets to become obviously rare and quite an intriguing entry into the Stahlhelm and really combat helmet history. But on that note, this seems to be a pretty good point to wrap things up. Online you can find a number of sources for these, with even a Facebook group that's been trying to catalog serial numbers of surviving examples. Additionally, a bit of the information presented here isn't as reported on by many of said sources, and was actually researched and discussed by the Galway Archaeological and Historical Society, being presented in 2020 via digital lecture, due to COVID of course. If you want to take a look at either the group or GAL's, link can be found in the description. If the video was intriguing, enjoyable, and you found it entertaining, perhaps leave a like and subscribe if you haven't yet done so. If not, it's no problem at all. Just be sure to make your way back here really soon for more of the history of, right here on Uniform History.